Today we're taking a look at some of my favorite monthly paying dividend ETFs. Now, not all of these ETFs are dedicated dividend funds. Some will have a major focus on dividend payments. Others are going to be more value cash flow based that still pay a pretty nice dividend on a monthly basis. And finally, we will include at the end some covered call funds that have a completely different strategy and deliver a lot of monthly income. Now, the ETFs I'm going to mention today might be a little bit different than the ones you're used to, because if you Google this topic, you're going to see a lot of very established and popular names like SDIV, SPHD from Investico, Wisdom Tree, ticker DHS. A good portion of the funds I'm talking about today are actually brand new, so we do have to wait and see how effective they're going to be, but I do want to bring it to your attention because, at least on the surface, they are very fascinating, at least to me. And the first name on the list definitely falls into this category. Ticker is COWS, and it was established, the inception date is last month. In terms of net assets, it already has over $4 million, and the holdings as of right now is in the range of 50. The expense ratio is 0.39. So this ETF invests in companies with high free cash flow yield and dividend growth, aimed to provide long-term capital appreciation and monthly income distributions. We have a lot of names to get to, so I'm not going to go over every small detail here, but this is a nice little overview of the selection methodology. They begin with the 1,000 most liquid US listed companies. Out of those names, they select for the 100 highest free cash flow yielding stocks. Next comes the dividend growth filter. They want 3 years of uninterrupted annual dividend growth. And then ultimately we have the quality screen. So the payout ratio cannot be above 75%, and the top 10% yielding stocks are eliminated. And as of right now, that leaves you with these as the top 10 holdings. So it's certainly an interesting strategy. And there's also a sister ETF, ticker HCOW, which is the same exact concept, but in addition to what we just saw, they add a covered call strategy. So this is going to really boost and supercharge the monthly dividend. However, it will most likely cap some upside potential. All right, moving on. The next ticker here is GDVD. This is by R-Cubed, and it's their global dividend growth ETF. And that right there, the global aspect of this ETF, is one of my favorite things about this. So you guys might know that I'm a huge fan of ticker IXN, which is a global tech ETF. It gives you mostly exposure to US companies because they are the biggest, most profitable companies after all, but they sprinkle in some international exposure all in one ETF. And that gives you proportional, true global exposure without needing to have both a US ETF and an international ETF. Unfortunately, there's not many ETFs like IXN, but ticker GDVD is one of them, and it focuses on the dividend side of the market. So GDVD seeks current income and long-term growth of income and capital appreciation. The fund is actively managed, so keep that in mind, and they use quantitative screens such as dividend yield, return on invested capital, free cash flow, and revenue growth metrics. And that's followed by a qualitative screen, which is meant to help the management here identify companies it believes have the commitment and capacity to pay dividends and whose potential growth of capital is expected to be above average. As of June of this year, these are the top 10 holdings. Number 1 is Taiwan Semi, BlackRock, Microsoft, Chevron, followed by a few more international names. And in terms of regional exposure, about half is the US, the UK is 10%, France 5%, Hong Kong about 5%, Denmark 4.29%. This ETF is still relatively new. The inception date is March of 2022. And the assets under management is only 23 million. Also, the expense ratio is a little bit high, 0.88, but they pay that monthly dividend, and the yield right now is about 3%. And over the past 1 year, this is what GDVD looks like stacked up against the S&P 500 and SCHD. All right, moving on. The next name I have for you guys is by Victory Shares, and it's their free cash flow ETF, ticker VFLO. So somewhat similar to the previous two names, this also has a major focus on the free cash flow yield, as well as companies with favorable growth prospects. So they're trying to find both profitable and fast-growing companies. And just in case you don't know, free cash flow is the remaining cash a company has after covering all expenses. It can be used to invest in growth, pay the dividend, or pay down debt. And they give you two nice charts here to illustrate that the free cash flow yield of these companies are above that of the market, and the long-term sales growth is still very competitive. So they begin here with the 400 most profitable US companies. and then they select out of those the 75 highest free cash flow yielding stocks. From those, they filter for the top 50 highest growth stocks, and then they weight those by the free cash flow yield. This is another new ETF. The inception date is June 23rd. 2023. It is a little bit larger. The assets under management is 85 million with an expense ratio of 0.39. The fund has only paid 3 actual dividend payments so far, so we don't have an overall annual yield quite yet. But as you can see, the payout is every month. These are the top 10 holdings. We have some recognizable names like Expedia, CVS, AbbVie. It does appear that the healthcare and energy sector dominate this fund, so keep that in mind. And so far against the market, it does appear to be a bit more conservative, as you might expect from a profitability-focused ETF. Now, unlike the previous 3 names, this one you might be familiar with. It's the Wisdom Tree US Quality Dividend Growth Fund. This fund has been around for quite a while, and it's also very popular. The assets under management is almost 10 billion. And that's for good reason, because when you compare the returns over the past 5 years, it is very competitive with the rest of the market with a bit less volatility and of course a monthly payout, although the yield here is only 1.9%. And this right here is the index behind the ETF. So the index is comprised of 300 companies from the US Dividend Index and ranked based off of growth and quality factors. The growth factor is based on long-term earnings growth expectations, and the quality factor is based on 3-year historical average return on equity and return on assets. So it's a pretty simple approach, and it leaves you with these names as the top 10 holdings. All right, now we're getting into the ETFs that implement a covered call strategy to help boost your monthly income. The first name here I want to mention is ticker KNG. This is a Dividend Aristocrats ETF. Dividend Aristocrats are companies that have paid and increased their dividend for at least 25 plus consecutive years. And this ETF takes those names, that index, and then applies a partial covered call strategy on top of it. And they say here their primary goal is to generate a level of income from dividends and option premiums that is approximately 8% over the annual dividend yield of the S&P 500 index. And this is pretty useful. They say right here that the percent overwritten as of August is 23%, which means the remaining 76% has no upside cap and it can fully appreciate with the rest of the market. And as of yesterday, these are the top 10 holdings. Pretty familiar, established dividend aristocrats. Now, KNG is listed as having a quarterly dividend with the yield of 5%, by the way. But if we take a look at the recent dividend payments, it looks to me that they are beginning to switch from quarterly to monthly. So last year in 2022, they paid in September, then, as you would expect, December, another 3 months later in March, and then again in June. However, just 2 months later, they paid a dividend in August, and then the following month, again in September. And this dividend payment was lower, which was to be expected if they switched to a more frequent payout basis. So I'm going to be closely watching this and see if they pay out again at the end of this month. And if they are indeed making this switch from quarterly to monthly payments, that is welcome news, and it's why I'm talking about them in this video. Another really fascinating new name in the covered call monthly income space is ticker TDVI, which is from the same company as KNG. Now, you guys might be familiar with ticker TDIV. This is older, more established, has $2 billion in assets under management. And this is a technology dividend index fund with these as the top 10 holdings. It's all tech names that pay a dividend. And in my opinion, TDIV is a really nice and overlooked dividend ETF that has outperformed the market over the past 5 years. However, the dividend at 1.9% really isn't anything special, and I think that's why they came out with this new variant. So this also invests in the NASDAQ Technology Dividend Index, but then it adds that option overlay strategy to help boost the dividend yield and also limit some upside potential. Somewhat uniquely though, these call options are on the NASDAQ 100 and or the S&P 500 index. As of September, the percent overwritten is a modest about 17%. And the top 10 holdings are, as far as I can tell, identical to TDIV. I was already a fan of TDIV, so I'm certainly going to be adding this name to my watch list and see how the strategy unfolds. And then finally, to end off this video, I have to mention DIVO. This is my favorite covered call ETF of all time. I'm sure you guys are familiar with DIVO, but this seeks income from dividend paying stocks and opportunistically writes covered calls on those names. DIVO is managed with a strong emphasis on owning high-quality, large-cap companies with historical dividends and earnings growth. They try to balance among the traditional 10 S&P 500 sectors. It's fairly concentrated at just 20 to 25 holdings, and they screen according to market cap, management track record, earnings, cash flow, and return on equity. And finally, they have that partial covered call strategy on top of this to help boost the yield. So it's investing in names like United Health Group, Visa, Microsoft, Chevron, Apple, Procter & Gamble. It's delivering a roughly 5% monthly dividend yield, and the track record, the long-term performance has been stellar. It's a little bit less growthy than the rest of the market, but it's also more defensive, so it tends to catch up during volatile periods in the market. I'm a huge fan of DIVO. I think the strategy has proven itself to be effective, and out of all the names I mentioned, DIVO is the one ETF that I hold right now. That's going to do it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next one.